When I found a tube of lubricant hidden in my wife's underwear drawer, I knew Susan was cheating. When I discovered it was with Derek, our daughter's husband, my world collapsed. Susan wasn't just a cheating wife. She was a woman willing to kill her husband after nearly 40 years of marriage. They wanted to play games with my life. Fine. What I did to them next made them both scream. Before I tell you exactly what I did to Derek and Susan, please subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. Stories like this need to be shared to warn others about predators hiding in plain sight. My name is Jim Patterson, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered my wife of 38 years was planning to kill me for my life insurance money. But it wasn't just the betrayal that nearly destroyed me. It was finding out she was doing it with our own son-in-law. The moment I knew something was wrong came on a Friday afternoon, when I found that tube of personal lubricant hidden in Susan's underwear drawer. Let me back up. For weeks, my wife had been acting strange. Susan, my blonde 59-year-old wife who used to greet me at the door after my shifts at Home Depot, suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. She was always on her phone texting someone and hiding the screen when I walked by. She started wearing expensive perfume again, something she hadn't done in years. Then there was Derek Martinez, our son-in-law. The 33-year-old landscaper, married to our daughter Jessica, had been showing up at our Tampa home constantly, always with excuses. He needed tools. He wanted to check the sprinkler system. He was worried about our palm tree. But Derek only came when I was supposed to be at work late. That Friday, I came home early with a migraine and found Derek's white pickup truck parked across the street. I walked quietly into our house and heard voices from the kitchen. Susan's laugh, but different, younger, flirtatious. "You're terrible," I heard her say, followed by Derek's deep chuckle. When I walked into the kitchen, Susan jumped up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Derek was leaning against my counter, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, looking perfectly relaxed. "Jim," Susan's voice was too bright. "You're home early?" Derek flashed his easy smile. "Just checking that irrigation system, Jim. Noticed some brown spots on your lawn." The explanation was reasonable, but something felt wrong. Susan's flushed cheeks, the way they'd both startled when I appeared, the intimate way they'd been talking. Derek left quickly, but I caught the look that passed between them. It lasted only a second, but it was loaded with meaning, the kind of look that said they'd continue their conversation later. That night, Susan was unusually attentive. She made my favorite pot roast and kept asking about my headache. Her kindness should have comforted me, but it felt performative, like she was overcompensating for something. The next morning, Susan was still asleep when I got up to find my reading glasses. I thought I'd left them on my nightstand, but they weren't there. Maybe they'd fallen behind the dresser during the night. I quietly opened Susan's dresser drawer, thinking they might have slid over to her side. That's when my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong among her silk underwear and nightgowns. A tube of personal lubricant, expensive high-end still in its original packaging. I stared at it in the morning light filtering through our bedroom window. My reading glasses were forgotten. Susan and I hadn't been intimate in over 2 years. We'd both accepted it as part of getting older. So why did she have this? And why was it hidden like a guilty secret? I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, my hands trembling. The woman sleeping peacefully beside me, the woman I'd loved for nearly 4 decades, suddenly felt like a complete stranger, and I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. That discovery changed everything. I needed concrete evidence, not just suspicions. I needed to hear the truth with my own ears. Monday morning, I kissed Susan goodbye like always, but everything felt different. Her lips were cold and she barely looked up from her phone. As I drove to Home Depot, my mind was already working on a plan. 20 years in retail management had taught me about security systems and surveillance equipment. During lunch, I drove to Radio Shack and bought a small digital voice recorder with voice activation technology, the kind that could record for hours without being detected. "Planning to record some lectures, sir?" the young clerk asked. "Something like that," I replied, paying cash. That afternoon, I called Susan. "Hey, honey, I'm working late tonight. Inventory in the garden center." "Oh, okay," she said, and I caught relief in her voice. "I'll just heat up leftovers." "Don't wait up. This might take until 10. At 5:30, instead of heading home, I parked 3 blocks away and walked back through our neighborhood. I felt like a spy in my own life, Mrs. Rodriguez waved from her garden, and I forced a smile, wondering if she knew something I didn't. I entered through our back door, moving quietly. The house felt different when I thought Susan was hiding secrets. Every creak sounded amplified. Every shadow seemed suspicious. I could hear the shower running upstairs. Susan was getting ready for something. Working quickly, I found the perfect spot behind our living room bookshelf, tucked between photo albums we never looked at. The device was small enough to hide completely. I tested it once, whispering, testing, and playing it back. Crystal clear. My hands shook as I set it up. In 38 years of marriage, I'd never spied on Susan, but finding that lubricant had shattered something fundamental. The shower stopped. I quickly positioned the recorder and headed to the kitchen, grabbing water to explain my presence. Jim, Susan called from upstairs. Is that you? Yeah, just getting some water. Forgot my bottle. I thought you were working late. I am, just stopped by quick. When she came downstairs, she looked stunning. Makeup styled hair, a dress I hadn't seen in months. She looked like she was going on a date. You look nice, I said. Going somewhere special. She blushed. Just meeting girlfriends for dinner. Nothing fancy. Which girlfriends? Linda and Carol from yoga. That new Italian place on Davis Islands. I nodded and kissed her cheek, tasting expensive perfume. Have fun. See you when I get home. As I drove away, I watched our house in the rearview mirror. Within 10 minutes, Derek's white pickup truck turned onto our street. I parked at the end of the block and waited, heart pounding. At 7:15, Derek walked up to our front door and knocked. Susan answered immediately, like she'd been waiting by the window. Even from a distance, I could see how she smiled at him, how she stepped aside to let him in, how she closed the door quickly behind him. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching our house, watching the drawn curtains, thinking about the recording device hidden in our living room. Tomorrow I would have answers. Tomorrow I would know the truth. But as I finally drove back to Home Depot, I realized I was terrified of what that truth might be. The next evening, I sat in my truck outside Home Depot for 20 minutes, staring at the small digital recorder in my hands. I'd retrieved it that afternoon while Susan was at her supposed yoga class. The device showed 2 hours and 37 minutes of recorded conversation. I was terrified to press play. Finally, I put in the earphones and hit the button. At first, there was just silence, then the sound of our front door opening. I was starting to think you weren't coming. Susan's voice soft and intimate. Sorry, baby. Had to finish a job in Westchase. Traffic was murder. Derek's voice equally intimate. The way he called her baby made my stomach turn. I fast-forwarded through small talk about his landscaping work, her complaints about my long hours at Home Depot. Then Derek's voice became more serious. So did you call the insurance company? My blood went cold. I did, Susan replied. The policy is definitely $500,000, and I'm the sole beneficiary. Good. And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Jim, no, he's clueless. Thinks I'm just going through menopause or something. He has no idea I know about his high blood pressure medication. I pressed pause, my hands shaking. Blood pressure medication, I didn't have high blood pressure. What were they talking about? I hit play again. The pills I got from my contact at the pharmacy look identical to his regular ones, Derek was saying, but these will gradually increase his blood pressure over time. Make it look like a natural heart attack. How long, Susan asked. Maybe 3 months. 4 at the most. At his age with his stress levels, no one will question it, especially after I start adding the extra sodium to his food. I felt like I was going to vomit. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to murder me. 500,000, Susan said dreamily. We could disappear to Costa Rica like we talked about. Buy that little beach house. And your daughter won't suspect anything. Jessica, she's too busy with her paramedic job to pay attention. Besides, she likes you. Thinks you're good for me after all these years with boring old Jim. The casual way she dismissed our 38-year marriage, the way she called me boring old Jim, cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever felt. What about the house? Derek asked. I'll sell it after a decent mourning period. Maybe 6 months. Then we're free. There was a pause, then the sound of kissing. I ripped the earphones out, unable to listen anymore. I sat in my truck in the Home Depot parking lot, surrounded by the familiar sights of my workplace, and felt my entire world crumble. My wife of 38 years wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to kill me for my life insurance money. With our son-in-law, the man married to our daughter, the man I'd welcomed into our family, helped move furniture for Lent money to when his landscaping business was struggling. I thought about all those times Derek had come over recently. Had he been switching my medication? Then I rushed home and went straight to our medicine cabinet. My blood pressure pills looked exactly the same as always, but now I knew they weren't. That night I flushed every pill down the toilet and lay awake staring at the ceiling while Susan slept peacefully beside me. The woman who was planning my murder was sleeping 2 feet away from me, probably dreaming about Costa Rica and beach houses bought with my death money. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Jim Patterson. I'd spent 40 years solving problems, managing people, handling crises, and I was about to handle the biggest crisis of my life. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine, but I was going to change the rules. After discovering their murder plot, I couldn't just wait to be poisoned. I needed to know everything about Derek Martinez. If I was going to fight back, I needed ammunition. The next morning, I called in sick to Home Depot and parked outside Derek's apartment complex. At 8:15, he emerged in his landscaping uniform and climbed into his white pickup truck. I followed him, staying 3 cars back. Derek's first stop wasn't a landscaping job. It was Publix grocery store on Dale Mabry Highway. He went inside for 20 minutes and came out with a small bag, shopping like he was buying for someone else. From Publix, Derek drove to Palmaquia, an upscale neighborhood. He pulled into the driveway of a beautiful Mediterranean house with perfect gardens. I parked down the street and watched through binoculars. A woman answered the door. Older, maybe early 60s, silver hair, expensive clothes. She hugged Derek intimately, not like a client greeting her landscaper. The hug lasted too long. Her hand lingered on his chest. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, our neighbor from 3 houses down. Derek carried the grocery bag inside and didn't come out for over an hour. When he emerged, his hair was messed up and his shirt wrinkled. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in her doorway wearing a silk robe, waving goodbye with the same dreamy smile I'd seen on Susan's face. My stomach dropped. Derek wasn't just cheating with my wife. He was running an operation. I followed him to Hyde Park, where another older woman, maybe late 50s, greeted him with intimate familiarity. Then to Westchase, where a third woman, probably 65, practically pulled him inside. By noon, I'd watched Derek visit 4 different women, all older, all wealthy, based on their neighborhoods. At each location, he stayed 45 minutes to an hour. At each location, he emerged looking like he'd just had sex. Derek Martinez wasn't just a landscaper. He was a professional gigolo, targeting older women with money. I sat in a McDonald's parking lot, processing what I'd witnessed. Derek was systematically seducing wealthy women in their 50s and 60s, but why? The answer hit me like a punch. Susan wasn't special. She wasn't the love of Derek's life. She was just another mark in his sugar mommy hunting operation. Another lonely older woman with assets to exploit. But Susan was different. Susan had a husband with a $500,000 life insurance policy. Susan had a husband who could be murdered to make Derek rich enough to disappear forever. That afternoon, I drove to Mrs. Rodriguez's house and knocked. She answered in the same silk robe, cheeks still flushed. "Jim, what brings you by?" "Elena, I need to ask you something. Are you involved with Derek Martinez?" Her face went white, then red. "What do you mean?" "I saw him here this morning. Elena, Derek is married to my daughter, and he's having an affair with my wife. You're not the only one." She staggered backward, gripping the doorframe. "That's impossible. Derek loves me. He's going to leave his wife. Has he asked you for money? Access to your accounts?" The look on her face told me everything. Derek Martinez was a professional con artist, and he'd been playing all of us. Mrs. Rodriguez broke down crying on her doorstep, revealing the true scope of Derek's operation. "He said his landscaping business was struggling," she sobbed. "I've given him $15,000 over 6 months for equipment, truck payments, business investments." My blood boiled. "What about your will, Elena?" Her face crumpled. "He helped me update it last month. Made him a beneficiary for $25,000. Derek wasn't just stealing money. He was positioning himself to profit from their deaths. Over the next 2 days, I investigated Derek's other victims. What I discovered was a systematic con game running for at least 2 years. Margaret Chen in Hyde Park had given Derek over $30,000 for various emergencies. Derek promised to marry her while slowly bleeding her dry. Patricia Williams in Westchase had been paying Derek's rent for 8 months. She thought they were living together, but Derek convinced her he needed his own place for business. Linda Foster in South Tampa had bought Derek a new truck as an engagement gift. Derek promised to propose on her 70th birthday. Each woman thought she was Derek's only love. Each woman was being financially exploited. Each had been manipulated into changing legal documents in Derek's favor. But Susan was the biggest prize. Susan wasn't just giving money. She was helping commit murder for $500,000. Derek had researched his targets carefully. Lonely widows and unhappy wives with significant assets. Women whose husbands were either dead or could be made dead. I estimated he'd stolen over $100,000, with potentially millions more in inheritance money if his plan succeeded. That's when I made my decision. This couldn't just be about revenge on Susan and Derek for trying to kill me. This had to be about protecting all of Derek's victims and ensuring he could never hurt another woman. Derek thought he was smart, targeting older women he assumed were vulnerable. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd targeted the wrong man's wife. I'd spent my career solving problems and managing crises. I knew how to plan, execute, and permanently resolve problems. Derek wanted to play games with people's lives. Fine. I was going to end his game once and for all. The plan forming in my mind was elegant in its simplicity. Derek had used intimacy as a weapon against these women. I was going to use that same intimacy to destroy him. Publicly. Humiliatingly. In a way that would expose his crimes to everyone and ensure he could never victimize another woman. Susan thought she was going to be rich. Derek thought he was going to disappear to some tropical paradise with stolen money. They were both wrong. I was going to make sure the whole world saw exactly what kind of monsters they really were, and I knew exactly how to do it. That night, I sat in my garage workshop surrounded by tools and supplies, my mind working like the problem-solving machine it had been for 40 years. Derek and Susan wanted to destroy me, fine, but I was going to destroy them first, and I was going to do it in a way that exposed their crimes to the entire world. The plan had to be perfect, it had to be public, and it had to ensure that Derek could never hurt another woman. My years managing Home Depot had taught me about chemicals, adhesives, and industrial supplies. I knew exactly what I needed, and I knew how to get it without raising suspicion. The centerpiece of my plan was elegantly simple. Derek and Susan were using intimacy as their weapon. I was going to turn that weapon against them. They wanted to be together. I was going to make sure they were stuck together, literally. Industrial super glue, the kind we use for heavy construction projects at Home Depot. Once it bonded, it required professional medical intervention to separate. It would be painful, humiliating, and impossible to hide. But the glue was just the beginning. I needed to ensure maximum public exposure. I needed witnesses. I needed emergency responders. I needed the entire neighborhood to see what Derek and Susan really were. The smoke detector plan came to me while I was reviewing our store's fire safety protocols. A triggered smoke alarm would bring the fire department, and if there were sounds of people in distress, they'd break down doors to save lives. My daughter Jessica was a paramedic supervisor. There was a good chance she'd be on the responding team. This was the part that made me pause. Jessica would have to see her mother and her husband in the most humiliating situation imaginable. She'd have to witness the destruction of her marriage and her family in the most public way possible. But Jessica was also Derek's victim. She deserved to know what kind of man she'd married. She deserved to know that her husband was a predator who'd been planning to destroy our family. I spent the weekend gathering supplies. Industrial superglue from our warehouse, a Bluetooth speaker small enough to hide but loud enough to simulate screams for help, smoke detector batteries, and a remote trigger system I built using electronics knowledge from my early days in retail. The hardest part was getting access to Susan and Derek's meeting place. But I'd been watching their pattern for weeks. They always used our house when I was supposedly working late. They felt safe there, comfortable, careless. That carelessness was going to be their downfall. I tested every component of my plan. The smoke alarm would trigger. The Bluetooth speaker would broadcast sounds of distress. The fire department would respond. They'd break down the door to save lives. They'd find Derek and Susan stuck together with industrial adhesive, unable to separate, unable to hide, unable to deny what they were doing. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I wouldn't have to confront them directly. I wouldn't have to prove anything in court. The evidence would be literally stuck to their bodies. The entire neighborhood would witness their humiliation. Derek's other victims would see him for what he really was. But most importantly, Jessica would know the truth. She'd see that her husband was a con artist, and her mother was a would-be murderer. It would hurt her, but it would also free her from Derek's manipulation. As I sat in my garage that Sunday night, putting the finishing touches on my plan, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. For the first time since finding that lubricant in Susan's drawer, I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the target. I was the hunter. Derek Martinez had spent 2 years destroying women's lives. Tomorrow, I was going to destroy his. Monday morning, I walked into Home Depot, knowing this might be my last day as just a retail manager. I was about to become something else entirely. My first stop was our commercial supply room. Industrial superglue, the kind used for heavy construction, The label warned that skin contact required immediate medical attention. Perfect. The glue was clear odorless, with the same consistency as personal lubricant. In dim lighting, no one would notice the difference. From our security department, I borrowed a small Bluetooth speaker. I tested its volume in my office, loud enough to simulate people in distress. I downloaded emergency call audio files, feeling sick but knowing it was necessary. The electronics came from our electrical department. Remote switches, batteries, wireless transmitters. During lunch, I installed a secondary smoke detector in our living room, identical to our existing system, but controlled by a remote trigger I could activate from outside. Susan and Derek met every Tuesday when I supposedly worked late inventory. Tomorrow was Tuesday. Tomorrow, their routine would become their trap. That evening, I tested everything in my garage. Remote trigger, perfect. Bluetooth speaker, connected seamlessly. Super glue tube, looked identical to Susan's hidden lubricant. I practiced the sequence. Wait for Derek. Give them 30 minutes. Trigger smoke alarm. Activate distress sounds. Return as concerned husband when emergency vehicles arrived. Timing was everything. Too early and they wouldn't be compromised. Too late and they might leave. Tuesday morning, I called Susan. Honey, I'll be really late tonight. Complete inventory of the garden center. Might not be home until 10. Oh, that's fine, she said, excitement barely hidden. I'll just watch TV and go to bed early. Don't wait up. And Susan, I love you. Pause. I love you too, Jim. Probably the last lie we'd ever tell each other. At 3 o'clock, I parked 2 blocks from home. Derek's white pickup appeared at 3:15, right on schedule. He walked confidently to our door carrying a small bag. Wine or flowers, probably. He had no idea he was walking into a trap 40 years in the making. I waited 30 minutes, heart pounding. Then I reached for my phone and the app that would change everything. The moment had arrived. Derek's white pickup sat in our driveway, and I knew Susan and Derek were inside, probably sharing wine and planning their future with my life insurance money. Time to set the final piece of my trap. I waited until 4 o'clock, giving them time to get comfortable and confident. Then I quietly approached our house through the backyard, using my spare key to enter through the kitchen door. I could hear voices and laughter from upstairs. Relaxed, intimate sounds of 2 people who thought they were completely safe. Moving silently through my own house felt surreal. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. Every shadow felt dangerous. But I'd been planning this moment for days and my hands were steady. First stop, our bedroom. Susan's underwear drawer was slightly open. She'd probably grabbed the lubricant in preparation for Derek's arrival. I found the tube exactly where I'd discovered it weeks ago, hidden beneath silk and lace like a guilty secret. This was the moment of truth. I unscrewed the cap and emptied the clear gel into our bathroom sink, watching it swirl down the drain. Then I refilled the tube with industrial superglue, screwing the cap back on carefully. The substitution was perfect. Same clear consistency, same packaging, same weight. In the heat of passion, they'd never noticed the difference. I placed the tube back exactly where Susan had hidden it and moved to position my electronic devices. The Bluetooth speaker went behind our living room couch, small enough to be invisible but positioned for maximum audio impact. I tested the connection. My phone showed a strong signal. The modified smoke detector was already installed, blinking innocently on our ceiling. To anyone else, it looked like standard safety equipment. Only I knew it was connected to the remote trigger in my pocket. I could still hear them upstairs. Susan's girlish laugh, Derek's confident voice, the sounds of 2 people who thought they were getting away with murder, completely unaware that justice was about to be served. Everything was in position. The trap was set. The substituted lubricant waited in Susan's drawer like a time bomb. The emergency response system was ready to activate at the touch of a button. I slipped back out through the kitchen and returned to my truck 2 blocks away. From there, I had a clear view of our house and could monitor the street for emergency vehicles when the time came. Now all I had to do was wait. Wait for them to get comfortable. Wait for them to use Susan's special preparation. Wait for the industrial adhesive to do its work. Derek Martinez thought he was smart, seducing older women and planning elaborate cons. Susan thought she was clever, plotting to murder her husband for insurance money. Neither of them had any idea that Jim Patterson, boring old retail manager, was about to teach them both a lesson they'd never forget. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and I had the perfect trap waiting for them. From my truck, I watched our house and waited. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across our neighborhood, and everything looked peaceful and normal. Mrs. Rodriguez was watering her garden. Kids were riding bikes down the street. Nobody had any idea that in a few minutes our quiet Tampa suburb was about to witness the scandal of the decade. At 4:30, the sounds from our house changed. I could hear music playing. Susan had put on something romantic. The intimate laughter grew softer, more private. They were moving toward the moment that would destroy them both. I sat in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, listening to the distant sounds of my wife's betrayal. Part of me wanted to storm into that house and confront them directly, but I'd come too far to let emotion ruin my perfect plan. At 5 o'clock, the music stopped. The house went quiet except for muffled voices from our bedroom. I knew what was happening. Susan was probably lighting candles, opening wine, creating the romantic atmosphere she thought Derek deserved. The same romantic gestures she'd stopped making for me years ago. "You're so beautiful." I heard Derek's voice drift through our open bedroom window. "I've been thinking about this all day," Susan replied, her voice breathless with excitement. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay focused. This wasn't about the affair anymore. This was about justice for all of Derek's victims. This was about stopping a predator and a would-be murderer. At 5:15, I heard Susan's drawer open, the moment I'd been waiting for. "I got something special for us," she said, her voice playful and seductive. "You always think of everything," Derek replied. There was rustling movement, the sounds of two people preparing for intimacy. I imagined Susan retrieving the tube from her hiding place, completely unaware that its contents had been replaced with industrial adhesive. For several minutes, there were only soft sounds, whispered endearments, the kinds of intimate noises that should have been between husband and wife, not between conspirators planning murder. Then at 5:23, everything changed. "Wait," Derek's voice suddenly tense. "Something feels wrong." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "I can't. This isn't right. We're stuck." "Stuck? What are you talking about?" "I mean, we're literally stuck together. What was in that tube?" Susan's voice rose to panic. "It was just lubricant. The same kind I always use." "Well, it's not working like lubricant. We can't separate." "Oh, I could hear them struggling, their voices escalating from confusion to fear to outright panic. The industrial superglue was doing exactly what it was designed to do, creating an unbreakable bond that would require professional medical intervention to dissolve. "Do something!" Susan screamed. "I'm trying, but every time I move, it gets worse. This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Their panic was music to my ears. For weeks, they'd been calm and confident, planning my death like it was a business transaction. Now they were learning what it felt like to be trapped with no escape. But their real humiliation hadn't even started yet. I reached for my phone and opened the app that controlled my smoke detector. Time for the neighborhood to meet the real Derek Martinez and Susan Patterson. I sat in my truck, listening to Derek and Susan's panicked voices through our bedroom window, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The industrial superglue was working perfectly. Now it was time for the real show to begin. I opened the app on my phone and pressed the button that would change everything. Immediately, the modified smoke detector in our living room began shrieking. The piercing alarm cut through the quiet Tuesday afternoon like a knife echoing off the houses in our peaceful neighborhood. But that was just the beginning. I activated the Bluetooth speaker and pressed play on the audio file I'd prepared. Suddenly, terrifying sounds of people screaming for help began broadcasting from inside our house. "Help us, fire, we're trapped." The recorded voices sounded desperate, authentic, like people facing imminent death. "Please, someone call 911, we can't get out." The combination of the smoke alarm and the screaming created exactly the emergency scenario I'd planned. Within seconds, neighbors began emerging from their houses, looking around in confusion and alarm. Mrs. Rodriguez dropped her garden hose and ran toward our house. "Oh my God, Jim and Susan's house is on fire." Mr. Chen from across the street grabbed his phone. "I'm calling 911. Fire department. There's a house fire on Maple Street with people trapped inside. We can hear them screaming." More neighbors appeared. Mrs. Williams from 2 doors down, the Johnsons with their teenage kids, old Mr. Foster walking as fast as his cane would allow. Within minutes, half the neighborhood was gathered on our front lawn, staring at our house with expressions of horror and concern. The beautiful irony was that Derek and Susan could hear everything happening outside, but they were in no position to call for help or explain their situation. They were literally stuck together in our bedroom, probably trying desperately to figure out how to get dressed and separate before anyone discovered them. "Where's the smoke?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, looking at our house. "I don't see any flames." "Maybe it's just starting," Mr. Chen replied. "But listen, you can hear people screaming inside." The recorded distress calls continued broadcasting from my hidden speaker, creating the perfect illusion of a fire emergency with trapped victims. I'd even included sounds of coughing and choking to make it more realistic. From my truck, I could see Derek's pickup in our driveway. The neighbors were starting to notice it too. Whose truck is that? Mrs. Williams asked. Isn't that Derek's? Mrs. Rodriguez said slowly. Jessica's husband? What would he be doing here when Jim's at work? I could practically see the pieces clicking together in their minds. The neighbors who'd always thought Susan and Derek were just friendly in-laws were starting to realize there might be more to the story. That's when the sirens began. First one, then two. Then what sounded like half the Tampa Fire Department racing down our street. Red trucks, ambulances, police cars, the full emergency response I'd orchestrated. And leading the convoy was Rescue Unit 12, Jessica's unit. I watched my daughter jump out of the passenger seat, her paramedic supervisor uniform crisp and professional, her face focused and determined. She had no idea she was about to walk into the most devastating moment of her life. What's the situation? Jessica called out to the crowd of neighbors. House fire with people trapped inside, Mr. Chen shouted back. We can hear them screaming. Jessica's training took over. She began directing her team toward our front door while the fire department prepared their equipment. She looked completely professional, completely in control. She had no idea that in about 30 seconds she was going to discover her husband and her mother naked and glued together in her childhood bedroom. I started my truck and began driving slowly toward our house, ready to play my role as the shocked and concerned husband who'd just arrived home to find his house surrounded by emergency vehicles. The trap was sprung, the audience was assembled, and the show was about to begin. Jessica stood at our front door, her paramedic training taking complete control. She'd responded to hundreds of emergency calls, but never to her own childhood home. Fire department, we need entry now, she called to Captain Morrison. We have confirmed voices inside possible smoke inhalation victims. The sledgehammer crashed against our front door, splintering the wood. Jessica led her medical team inside, while firefighters followed with equipment and hoses. Hello, fire department, Captain Morrison's voice boomed through our house. Where are you? Call out if you can hear us. Jessica moved through our living room with professional efficiency, checking for smoke, looking for victims. The house seemed normal. No visible fire, no smoke. But the distress calls had been clear. From upstairs came Derek's muffled, desperate voice. Up here, bedroom. We need help. Jessica's head snapped up. That voice was familiar. Too familiar. Second floor, master bedroom, she called to her team, taking the stairs two at a time. She reached our bedroom door and knocked hard. This is Tampa Fire Rescue. Are you injured? We need medical assistance, came Derek's strained voice. There's been an accident. Jessica turned the doorknob and pushed open the door to her childhood bedroom. What she saw made her freeze completely. Derek, her husband Derek, was in bed with Susan, her mother Susan. They were both naked, clearly panicked, and somehow physically connected in a way that made no sense. For a moment, Jessica's mind simply couldn't process what she was seeing. Her professional training told her these were two people in medical distress. Her personal reality told her this was impossible. Jessica? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. I can explain. We're stuck, Susan said, not meeting her daughter's eyes. Something went wrong with... We can't separate. Jessica stood in the doorway, her medical bag in one hand, her radio in the other, staring at the two people who had just destroyed her entire world. Behind her, Captain Morrison appeared. What's the situation? Jessica's voice failed her. For the first time in her career, she couldn't speak. Captain Morrison looked over her shoulder, and his expression changed immediately. Oh, hell, this is a medical situation. Jessica's training finally kicked in, overriding her personal shock. She stepped into the room, her voice becoming coldly professional. We need acetone and medical adhesive remover from the ambulance, she called down to her team. Bring skin separation equipment and pain management supplies. Derek tried to reach for her. Jessica, please listen to me. She stepped back, avoiding his touch. Don't talk right now. Susan was crying, but Jessica couldn't tell if it was from physical pain or emotional distress. Maybe both. How long have you been like this? Jessica asked her medical training, forcing her to gather information. About an hour, Derek replied. We tried everything. We can't move without severe pain. Jessica nodded curtly and spoke into her radio. This is Unit 12. We need additional medical support for adhesive extraction. 2 patients conscious and alert. As her team brought up the medical supplies, Jessica worked with mechanical precision. She'd separated people from industrial adhesives before. Workplace accidents, pranks gone wrong. But never her own mother and husband. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was literally pulling apart the two people who had torn her family apart. While Jessica worked upstairs to separate Derek and Susan, I played my role perfectly outside. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, and word was spreading through our Tampa suburb like wildfire. "I just can't believe this," Ms. Rodriguez whispered to Mrs. Williams. "Susan and Derek Wright under Jim's nose. That poor man." Mr. Chen shook his head, looking at me with sympathy. 38 years of marriage. I stood among them, the picture of a devastated husband whose world was crumbling. "I don't understand any of this," I said, my voice breaking just enough to sound authentic. "Derek's been helping with yard work for months. Susan said they barely spoke to each other. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones hiding the biggest secrets," old Mr. Foster said, patting my shoulder sympathetically. More neighbors arrived every few minutes. People were pulling out their phones, recording everything. By tomorrow morning, this scandal would be all over Tampa social media. "Here they come," someone in the crowd shouted. The front door opened and Jessica emerged. First, her face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide her personal devastation. Behind her, two paramedics wheeled out a stretcher. Derek was on it, covered by a white sheet, but his face visible and bright red with humiliation. He couldn't look at anyone in the crowd, especially not at me. The neighbors pressed closer, everyone trying to get a better view. Camera phones flashed from every direction. "Derek Martinez," Mrs. Rodriguez called out loudly. "How could you do this to Jessica, to this family?" Derek turned his face away, but there was nowhere to hide. The entire neighborhood was witnessing his ultimate walk of shame. A second stretcher appeared with Susan also covered, but clearly conscious and mortified. She was crying, not from physical pain, but from the devastating humiliation of being caught in the most compromising situation imaginable. "Susan Patterson," Mrs. Williams announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I am absolutely shocked after everything Jim has done for you." The crowd murmured agreement, their sympathy clearly with me. I had become the victim, the wronged husband, the man who deserved everyone's support. "Jessica," I called out as the stretchers were loaded into separate ambulances. "What hospital are you taking them to?" She looked at me with eyes full of pain and confusion. "Tampa General, Dad. I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was happening." "None of us did, sweetheart. None of us could have known." As the ambulances pulled away with sirens wailing, I stood on our front lawn, surrounded by neighbors and emergency personnel. The entire street had witnessed Derek and Susan's public humiliation. Captain Morrison approached me. "Sir, for our report, we didn't find any evidence of an actual fire. The smoke detector appears to have malfunctioned." "Maybe they were the ones calling for help," I suggested, "when they got stuck like that." "That's probably it. I'm sorry you had to find out about the situation this way, Mr. Patterson." As the last emergency vehicle drove away, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of justice. Derek Martinez's con game was over. His reputation was destroyed. Every woman in Tampa would soon know exactly what kind of predator he really was. And Susan. Her betrayal was now public knowledge throughout our entire community. Perfect. 2 hours later, I sat in Tampa General's waiting room, playing the concerned husband perfectly. The emergency staff whispered about the unusual case. Two people glued together wasn't something they saw daily. Jessica appeared emotionally drained, but still in her paramedic uniform. She sat beside me silently. "How are they?" I asked, putting my arm around her. "Physically fine," she said quietly. "Doctors used acetone and solvents to separate them. Some skin irritation, but no permanent damage." "And emotionally?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "Mom won't look at me. Derek keeps trying to explain." I squeezed her shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, sweetheart." "Dad, did you have any suspicion at all?" I looked confused. "None. Derek was around helping with yard work, but I thought he was just being helpful. Your mother seemed different lately, but I figured it was work stress." Jessica nodded, accepting my explanation. "They're keeping them overnight for observation. Room 214 for Mom, 216 for Derek. Can I see Susan? Are you sure you're ready?" 38 years doesn't end without some conversation. I found Susan's room and knocked softly. She was staring at the ceiling, started crying when she saw me. "Jim, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." I sat down, hurt and confused. "How long, Susan?" "6 months," she whispered. "But Derek said he loved me, said we could have a future." "What about our future? Our marriage?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "I thought maybe you'd be happier without me. We haven't been close in years." I leaned forward, taking her hand. "Whatever problems we had, we could have worked through them. But this, with Jessica's husband, I know how terrible this is. A nurse entered with a small tube. "Mrs. Patterson, apply this healing gel to any skin irritation. It should help with inflammation." "Thank you," Susan said, placing the tube on her bedside table. "I should let you rest," I said, standing. "We'll talk tomorrow. Please don't hate me." "I could never hate you, Susan. I'm just very hurt." I kissed her forehead and left. Once in the hallway, I ducked into a supply closet I'd noticed earlier. From my jacket, I pulled out concentrated capsaicin cream, industrial strength from Home Depot's pest control section, nearly identical to the healing gel the nurse had delivered. I waited 10 minutes, then walked back. The hallway was empty, visiting hours ending, staff busy elsewhere. I slipped into Susan's room. She was dozing, exhausted. The healing gel sat exactly where she'd left it. Working quickly, I switched the tubes. The capsaicin cream looked identical to the medical gel. Susan would never notice until she applied it to her irritated skin. I pocketed the real gel and left silently. Phase 2 was in motion. After switching Susan's healing gel, I wasn't finished yet. Derek deserved the same treatment. I walked down the hall to room 216 and knocked softly. Derek was awake, staring at his phone with a worried expression. "Jim," he said, looking up with shame and fear. I don't know what to say. I entered the room, my face showing the perfect mixture of hurt and confusion. "Derek, I trusted you. I welcomed you into our family. How could you do this to Jessica, to me?" "It just happened," he said weakly. "Susan and we connected. I never meant to hurt anyone." I sat down in the visitor's chair. "Connected. Derek, you're married to my daughter. Susan is my wife of 38 years. Before he could respond, a nurse entered with an identical tube of healing gel. "Mr. Martinez, for any skin irritation from the adhesive removal, apply as needed." Derek took the tube and set it on his bedside table. "Thank you." And the nurse left, and I continued our conversation for a few more minutes, playing the wounded father-in-law. When I was sure Derek was sufficiently distracted by guilt, I excused myself. "I need some air," I said. "This is all too much to process." I left his room and waited in the hallway until I was certain no staff were around. Then I slipped back into Derek's room. He'd dozed off exhausted from the day's events. I quickly switched his healing gel with another tube of concentrated capsaicin cream. Now both of them would experience the burning consequences of their betrayal. I returned to the waiting area and sat with Jessica, maintaining my role as the devastated family patriarch. An hour after I'd switched both healing gel tubes, I sat in the waiting area with Jessica, maintaining my role as the devastated family patriarch. Then the screaming began. "Help, something's wrong, it's burning!" Susan's voice from room 214, high-pitched with panic. Seconds later, Derek's voice from 216. "Nurse, the gel. Something's wrong with this gel." Jessica jumped up immediately, her medical training kicking in. "That's Mom!" We rushed toward the rooms as nurses and doctors converged from all directions. I followed behind, playing the concerned husband while secretly enjoying every moment. Susan was writhing in her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face, desperately trying to wipe something off her skin. "The gel!" she screamed at the nurse. "I applied the healing gel, and it's like fire. Make it stop." In the next room, Derek was having an identical reaction. His face contorted in agony as he tried to remove the capsaicin cream that was now burning his irritated skin. "Get me milk," Jessica shouted to a nurse, immediately recognizing the symptoms. "And cooking oil. This looks like capsaicin exposure." Dr. Martinez rushed in, examining the tubes on both bedside tables. How did capsaicin get into medical healing gel? "Maybe a manufacturing error," Jessica suggested, though her voice carried suspicion. The medical staff worked frantically, using milk and oil to neutralize the burning sensation. Susan and Derek were both crying from the pain, their skin bright red, where they'd applied my special healing gel. "The pain should subside in about 30 minutes, Dr. Martinez told them. "But this is highly unusual. We'll need to report this to the manufacturer." I stood in the hallway watching the chaos with deep satisfaction. The industrial strength capsaicin from Home Depot's pest control section was doing exactly what I'd hoped, delivering a burning reminder of their betrayal. "How are you holding up, Dad?" Jessica asked, putting her hand on my shoulder. "I just don't understand how any of this happened," I replied, shaking my head sadly. "First the affair, now this medical accident. It's like everything is falling apart." As the medical team continued treating Susan and Derek's capsaicin burns, I noticed commotion at the elevator. Mrs. Rodriguez had arrived, looking agitated and determined. She marched straight toward us, her face flushed with anger and purpose. "Jim," she called out, "I heard about what happened today, about Derek and Susan being caught together." "Elena, this really isn't the time," I said gently. "As you can see, we're dealing with a medical emergency. No, Jim, she said firmly, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. This is the time, because I have something very important to tell you about Derek Martinez. Jessica looked up from consulting with the doctors. Mrs. Rodriguez, what do you mean? Elena looked between Jessica and me, then toward Derek's room, where his moans of pain were still audible. I mean, your husband isn't who you think he is, Jessica. And Jim, what happened to you today? You're not Derek's only victim. The hallway went quiet, except for the continued sounds of medical activity. Even the nurses seemed to sense that something significant was about to be revealed. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched her purse tightly, her hands shaking with emotion. Derek Martinez has been lying to all of us. Mrs. Rodriguez looked directly at Jessica. Your husband has been having an affair with me for 8 months. He told me he loved me, that he'd leave you. He took $15,000 from me for his struggling business. Jessica staggered backward. That's impossible. After hearing about today, I started making calls. Elena continued, pulling out her phone. Margaret Chen, Patricia Williams, Linda Foster. Derek has been dating all of them. Jessica leaned against the wall. How many women? At least 6 that I've found. Margaret gave him over $30,000. Patricia's been paying his rent for 8 months. Linda bought him a truck, thinking it was an engagement gift. From Derek's room came another moan, but now he sounded like he could hear every word. As if summoned, 2 more women appeared at the elevator. Margaret Chen and Patricia Williams, both looking confused and concerned. Elena called us, Margaret said. We came when we heard Derek was hospitalized. Patricia frowned. But Elena, Derek told me you were just a neighbor. He said we were practically living together. He told me the same about you, Elena replied. The 3 women stared at each other, Derek's deception becoming crystal clear. I think we need to compare notes about Derek Martinez, I said gently. For the next hour, Derek's victims shared their stories. The pattern was identical. Charm wealthy older women, then slowly ask for money. Small amounts first, then larger sums for business emergencies. He helped me update my will, Linda Foster admitted quietly. Made him a $25,000 beneficiary. $50,000 for me, Margaret said. Jessica listened in stunned silence. When Patricia mentioned Derek having keys to her house and bank access, Jessica finally spoke. We need to call the police. Already did, Elena said. Detective Morrison is on his way. This is systematic fraud. Through Derek's door, we could hear him trying to make phone calls, probably warning other victims. But his hands shook from capsaicin treatment, making it difficult. How much money total? Jessica asked. The women calculated. Between us 3, over $70,000, plus the truck. I put my arm around Jessica. I'm sorry, sweetheart. None of us saw this coming. But inside, I was satisfied. Derek's empire of lies was crumbling, and he was powerless to stop it. The elevator opened. Detective Morrison stepped out, badge visible. Derek's con game was officially over. Detective Morrison was a no-nonsense veteran cop in his 50s who'd clearly seen every type of con game Tampa had to offer. He listened to each woman's story with professional attention, taking detailed notes. Mr. Martinez, he said, entering Derek's hospital room, I need to speak with you about allegations of fraud and conspiracy. Derek, still recovering from the capsaicin burns, tried to sit up straighter. I don't know what you're talking about. These women, they gave me money, willingly. For a landscaping business that doesn't exist, Detective Morrison replied. We've already checked. Your business license expired 2 years ago. No tax filings, no legitimate income. I watched from the hallway as Derek's face went pale. His smooth-talking charm meant nothing when faced with actual legal consequences. And then there's the matter of the life insurance policy, the detective continued. We have recordings of you and Mrs. Patterson discussing plans to murder her husband. Derek's eyes went wide. Recordings? That's impossible. Technology is amazing these days, Mr. Martinez. Voice-activated digital recorders. Very small, very clear audio quality. I had given Detective Morrison the recording device from our living room, along with copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. Derek's con game wasn't just falling apart. It was being systematically dismantled by law enforcement. Derek Martinez, you're under arrest for fraud conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse, Detective Morrison announced, pulling out handcuffs. Even with his hands still red and painful from the capsaicin, Derek was cuffed to his hospital bed. The man who'd charmed his way into so many women's lives was now facing serious prison time. In the next room, Detective Morrison's partner was reading Susan her rights. Susan Patterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Jessica stood beside me, watching her mother and husband both being arrested. Dad, how did you know to record them? I put my arm around her shoulders. I didn't. I found that recording device after the fire department left. It must have been activated by all the commotion. Pure luck that it captured their conversation. It was a perfect lie, and Jessica accepted it completely. Over the next few days, the story exploded across Tampa. Local landscaper arrested in multi-victim con game made the front page of the Tampa Bay Times. Derek's photo was everywhere, warning other potential victims. The neighborhood rallied around me with incredible support. Casseroles appeared on my doorstep daily. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a support group for Derek's victims. The community saw me as the ultimate victim, a man who'd been betrayed by both his wife and son-in-law. Jim Patterson is a good man who deserves better, Mrs. Williams told a local news reporter. What Derek and Susan did to him is unforgivable. Derek was denied bail due to flight risk. The prosecutor found evidence of similar cons in 3 other states, making him a serial predator. He was facing 25 years in prison. Susan was released on bail but had to stay with her sister. I filed for divorce immediately, and thanks to the adultery and conspiracy charges, I kept everything: the house, my pension, my life insurance policy. Most satisfying was watching Derek's other victims get justice. Margaret Chen sued for recovery of her $30,000. Patricia Williams pressed charges for theft. Linda Foster got her truck back. Derek Martinez, the charming sugar mommy hunter, was finished. 2 weeks after the arrests, Jessica moved back home with me. We sat on our front porch one evening watching the sunset over Tampa Bay. "Dad, I'm sorry I brought Derek into our family," she said quietly. "You couldn't have known what he really was, sweetheart. Predators like Derek are experts at deception. I just feel so stupid." "You're not stupid. You're a good person who trusted someone you loved. That's not a character flaw." Jessica smiled for the first time since the scandal broke. "Thanks, Dad. I'm glad we have each other." I squeezed her hand, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Derek and Susan had tried to destroy our family, but instead they'd only made Jessica and me closer. Justice, as they say, was served. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making breakfast for Jessica and myself, listening to the morning news on the radio. The anchor was reporting Derek's sentencing: 28 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy and elder abuse across multiple states. "Good," Jessica said, walking into the kitchen in her paramedic uniform. "He got what he deserved." Our morning routine had become comfortable and healing. Jessica worked her shifts at Tampa General, and I'd returned to Home Depot, though now as a part-time consultant rather than full-time manager. We both needed time to rebuild our lives. The neighborhood had embraced us completely. Mrs. Rodriguez had become like family, often joining us for Sunday dinners. Margaret Chen, Patricia Williams, and Linda Foster had formed their own support group, and they'd all recovered most of their money through Derek's asset seizure. "Dad," Jessica said over coffee, "I've been thinking about moving back into my own place soon." I looked up concerned. "Are you sure you're ready? There's no rush." "I think I am, but I want to stay close. Maybe that apartment complex on Davis Islands. It's only 10 minutes away." "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." The truth was, I was proud of how strong Jessica had become. The scandal had devastated her initially, but she'd channeled that pain into becoming an even better paramedic. She'd been promoted to district supervisor, and her colleagues respected her professionalism in handling the most difficult situation imaginable. "What about you, Dad? Any thoughts about dating again?" I laughed. "After what I've been through, I think I'll stick to being a bachelor for a while. Besides, I've got my hands full being the neighborhood's unofficial counselor for women who've been conned by younger men." It was true. Word had spread throughout Tampa about Derek's operation, and I'd become something of an expert on recognizing the warning signs of romance scams. I'd helped 3 other families identify and stop similar cons. "You're like a superhero," Jessica teased. "Jim Patterson, defender of vulnerable women everywhere. Just a guy who learned the hard way how to spot a predator." That afternoon, I drove to Home Depot for my shift. My coworkers treated me with a mixture of respect and amazement. The story of how I'd exposed Derek and Susan had become legendary in our store. "Jim, you're like something out of a movie," my assistant manager Carlos said. "Using industrial superglue to catch cheaters, that's genius." "Just problem solving," I replied. "Same skills I use here every day." But privately, I was proud of what I'd accomplished. Derek Martinez had been a professional predator who'd hurt dozens of women. Susan had been willing to murder her husband of 38 years for money. They'd both gotten exactly what they deserved. That evening, Jessica and I sat on our front porch, watching the sunset over Tampa Bay. It had become our favorite time of day. Peaceful, reflective, hopeful. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret how everything happened, the way Derek and Mom were caught?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that you had to see what you saw. I regret that our family was torn apart by their greed and betrayal. But do I regret that they faced consequences for their actions? No, not for a second. Jessica nodded. I'm glad you feel that way, because what they did was unforgivable. The important thing is that we survived it. We're stronger now, and we know we can count on each other. Always, she agreed. As the sun set over Tampa, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine contentment. Derek was in prison where he belonged. Susan was facing her own legal consequences. The women Derek had victimized were getting justice and support. And Jessica and I had built something stronger than what Derek and Susan had tried to destroy. Sometimes justice comes from the courts, sometimes it comes from the community, and sometimes it comes from a 64-year-old Home Depot manager who refuses to be anyone's victim. I'd learned that revenge, when served properly, doesn't just punish the guilty, it protects the innocent and builds something better from the wreckage. Derek Martinez thought he could destroy Jim Patterson's life. Instead, he'd only made it stronger. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. Sometimes life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. My story isn't just another one of those betrayal stories you hear every day. It's about discovering that even in our darkest moments, God has a plan for justice. When I found that tube of lubricant in Susan's drawer, I never imagined it would lead to exposing a professional predator who had victimized so many innocent women. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about protecting others and standing up for what's right. Like many grandpa stories passed down through generations, this tale reminds us that wisdom comes with age, and sometimes the quiet ones are watching more carefully than anyone realizes. Derek Martinez thought he could manipulate older people because he underestimated our experience and determination. What I learned is that God works in mysterious ways, giving us the tools and knowledge we need exactly when we need them. My 40 years at Home Depot, my understanding of chemicals and electronics, none of it was coincidence. Every skill I'd developed was preparation for the moment when I needed to protect not just myself, but Jessica and all of Derek's other victims. These betrayal stories always end the same way. Truth eventually surfaces and justice prevails. God sees everything, even when we think we're alone in our suffering. The most important lesson from all grandpa stories like mine is that family bonds, when tested by fire, either break completely or become unbreakable steel. Jessica and I chose steel. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own experiences with betrayal and justice, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of courage, justice, and family bonds. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light.